Welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast, where we're joined by your hosts, Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. In each episode, we'll be sharing valuable insights and tips to help you turn your NDIS business into a profitable venture. So whether you're just starting out or looking to take your business to the next level, you've come to the right place. Let's stop surviving and start thriving.
G'day and welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast. My name is Paul Bryan. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Tania Gomez. How are you doing today, Tania?
I'm wonderful, Paul, and we are joined today by a very special guest. We're joined by Hank. Now, Hank, welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider. I believe that you have spent decades helping business owners navigate financial hardship, but your journey started with losing your own business. I thought it might be a nice introduction for you to share that story with us and I guess what you've learned from the journey.
Thanks, Tania, and thanks to both you and Paul for having me here today. Yes, it's quite a story. I around 22, 23 years ago had a very successful business on the Gold Coast. Our market was international tourism, and we had a great lifestyle and so on, and built up over many years. What happened was we had September 11 come along, and with September 11, international tourism just simply stopped. And our turnover at the time was probably about $6 million a year. It suddenly dropped down to about 3 due to reasons completely beyond our control. The problem is, and what often happens with businesses, are the overheads are set reasonably high, and they're not easy to be able to cut back and negate that. I had a really good accountant, really good lawyer, so I sat down with these guys and asked them, how do I save the house? How do I save the car? How do I save the business? How do we get out of this situation the best way possible? And they were, like I said, great accountants and good lawyers, but that wasn't their forte. And they said, what you've got to do is go off and see an insolvency practitioner. That's where you need to go. So I sat down with an insolvency practitioner and asked him the same questions. And he answered those in a way that really, really surprised me. And he said, look, I know the answers to those questions you're asking, but I can't tell you how to deal with that, because if I do, I conflict myself out of a job. And I learned something really, really important, that an insolvency practitioner has got a fiduciary duty to get the best result for creditors, not necessarily the director or the director's family or so on and so on. So it's quite an interesting situation, because accountants for many, many years have been referring people in financial position direct to insolvency practitioners. So I saw going through that, and I went through a liquidation and personal bankruptcy as a direct result of that. At 35, had to start again. Horrible experience, really, really scary. But what I found is the emotional side of it to be particularly challenging. And not only did I need really good advice, but I needed someone to hold my hand, And so I really saw a clear gap. And with that, I decided to set up a business that did nothing but provide no-nonsense direct advice and support to business owners going through that. And that's what inspired me to start Jonge Read.
Wow, it's amazing. What motivated you to turn such a tough experience into a career around helping someone, especially since the process and your experience, wasn't a lovely one? Why did you then decide to stay in that space and help people through such a tough environment?
Well, I guess what I worked out pretty quickly is once the phone stopped ringing and people stopped chasing and so on, I realised I could have kept the house, I could have kept the business, and I could have negated through those problems. But the problem is not thinking clearly when you're going through these events. So you can't think clearly. Because I sat there afterwards and went, geez, I could have done all of these things that's what really prompted me to do something about it.
Right.
Because just to be able to be there and to sit down with clients and look at those options, I think that's really the bottom line.
Amazing. Look, a lot of our listeners are obviously in disability and aged care support, and they're so passionate about the people that they're working with, the services and the results they're getting, and the mission that they've got. But many of them definitely not trained in business finance. What's one of the first warning signs that something's going wrong financially that they would be able to see and go, I should really look at this?
Yeah, okay. I think we've dealt with a lot of NDIS operators over the last few years, and what we find with NDIS operators is they really care. They really want to make a difference, and it's quite interesting. And they go into these businesses to make a difference to people, and sometimes struggle with managing the cash flow or getting some ideas, or running into issues there. So I think the first warning signs are really important, and I think the obvious ones like falling behind on BAS and superannuation. Definitely, if as soon as that happens, we know something's not going 100%. Juggling which bills to pay each week, that again, rings some alarm bells. And getting that first letter from the ATO, and starting that pressure and the people feeling anxious about that. That's probably what we see as being pretty important early signs. Now, they might sound minor, but they're usually the start that cash flow is slipping. And the danger is often to wait too long, as it can quickly shift from a business issue to becoming that the director becomes personally liable. So, we often say that when the stress starts showing up at home, that's the time to get advice, because if we act early, there are almost always safe and controlled options to fix before real damage is done.
Yeah. So, it's my 19th year of working for myself, and I've had all kinds of different businesses as far as revenue goes. And I can kind of remember in almost every business hitting a time where you are deciding, okay, I do cash flow forecasts, but before I knew how to do those, really going, okay, who am I paying when is that money coming out? And I guess doing a cash flow forecast in my head. I can't, I'm lucky now that in my business I don't have so many challenges like that, because it's a much smaller business than I used to run. But what are kind of the practical steps for providers when they feel that stress? Whether it is like, I know lots of people, lots of businesses who don't realize that the GST and their PAYG isn't their money, and they, that's like a line of credit, and lots of payment plans with ATOs. If they are doing those types of things, what can they do instead? What is the way? What's the first practical step they can take to really start to get back into a good financial place?
Yeah, okay. I think you really hit on it there, Tania. It's really doing those cash flow forecasts are really what needs to be done on an ongoing basis, and using a bookkeeper or the accountant. The accountant generally tends to be more big picture, but even having the accountant and or the bookkeeper set up the business operator with a cash flow that's easy to complete on a weekly basis, and to be able to watch it as it's going, making sure that we're not hitting situations where we're going into negative, or if we're going into negative, how long is that? Are we coming out of that again? And so on, because I think that's really important, because we get a lot of calls from business owners who say, "Oh, geez, I wish I would have reached out to you guys 6 months earlier, because we had more options," I suppose. Because as I pointed out earlier, sometimes when business owners fail to address a problem, they can become personally liable for things like tax debt and superannuation and so on. So I think it's, if you've got that cash flow, if you've got that plan and you can see it triggering, you might go, okay, I've got a really tough period here because it's Christmas or whatever, but I can see it coming out in January, so I'm reasonably comfortable. But I think the truth is, the earlier someone acts, the more options that can be on the table, like restructuring or negotiating with creditors or protecting personal assets before they're at risk.
Yeah, that's powerful, because people do put so much of themselves into their business, and it can become for a lot of people like their next child, and so they feel so very attached to this. But when they've got a good business, it's viable, but the debt is just continuing to mount. How can restructuring help? But then also, when does it make more sense to close or sell rather than go through that process?
Yeah, sure. I guess that's one of the things that we do when we meet with a client for the first time, is we're really trying to get an understanding of where the business is at. Hopefully they've got financials, and hopefully those financials are up to date or in a reasonably position, so we can get a good understanding of where the business is at, and hopefully those cash flows are there. And I guess it's a matter of getting, I think one of the first things that we do is get an understanding of what the client wants. What do they want to do? They're passionate about the business? Yes. Okay, terrific. Can we see the light at the end of the tunnel? Is there some costs in the business that we could get rid of? Is there some motor vehicles or caravans or stuff that's been purchased over a period of time that are draining the cash flow? Trying to get a bit of an understanding of that. Once we've got an understanding of that, we can work out what does a client want to do, and how do we then move that forward, because there's a number of different options that could be considered. Restructuring is one, and one we'll get into a little bit later on is these small business restructures, which are the cents in the dollar offer that a business owner can make to creditors. And the ATO are particularly supportive of those at the moment, and they're or to sell the business in a controlled manner and get out of it the best way possible. Because the biggest concern that we've got is waiting too long, and I've touched on this before, because if we wait too long, the tax office, and they generally tend to be the largest creditor, can issue that director with a director's penalty notice. Now, once a director's penalty notice lands and is expired, the director can become personally liable for that tax debt. Okay, and also, or if it's a supplier and that supplier starts to get nasty, that too can be problematic. So the biggest issue or the biggest situation that we see is clients that wait too long. They get too scared or too embarrassed to pick up the phone, because as Australians, we're always really proud and so on, and they avoid reaching out, and that tends to minimise the chance. So we quite often say to people, look, pick up the phone, have a chat with us. It costs nothing to have a chat with us, or pick up the phone to your accountant, or so on and so on, and get some ideas of what can be done.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess it's really about knowing when to ask for help and who's available, which is great for people to know a little bit about your service and that you guys exist. I guess my question for you is around lessons for NDIS providers specifically, and what would you say to a provider who's lying awake at night wondering where they go now? Should they fold? Should they fight? And how do they? What's your advice for someone in that situation?
Yeah, okay. Quite often, it's just to stop burying the head in the sand and to actually address it. Get that advice early. But what we quite often see is operators throwing more personal money into the business. And we try to encourage them not to do that, is to stop. We quite often see people dipping into super, using the family home, or taking out personal credit to like I said, to throw into the business. And we try to go, look, stop. Don't do that. Let's stop. Let's take a breather. Let's have a look at the options, because sometimes we might want to throw personal money in, but let's do that in a controlled manner and do that in the right way. Because sometimes when you lend money to a company as a business owner, a business owner can take security for that advance. And if they do that properly, then they become a secured creditor. Just like when you're going to the bank to get an overdraft, the bank takes security. So a business owner can certainly do that as well. So I think the advice to the business owner who's lying awake at night going, what do I do? Stop. Get advice. Let's have a look at the different options. Don't necessarily throw personal money straight away into the business. Let's have a look at the options. So the bottom line, our goal here at Jonge Read is to simply make sure that the client doesn't lose more money than they have to. Okay, because there are safe and structured ways to manage debt, but they only work if they act upon, the earlier the better, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And when we talk about a smart exit for NDIS providers, what does that actually look like for an NDIS provider? What are their options if they decide to exit their business?
Okay, no problems. Well, it can be a sale in a controlled manner is one way. That when we have a look at an NDIS operator, I guess generally there's two different ways that we tend to help them. One of them is with these new small business restructures. Just to touch on that a little bit further, that would be a cents in the dollar offer. As I said, the government brought that in during COVID to help business owners, because the government was sure that there were going to be so many business operators in financial trouble, and they're right, there has been. And the ATO have been very, very supportive. So our success rate here at Jonge Read is about 79% of the ones that we put up are getting across the board. And our average offer on those is about 30 cents in the dollar. Okay, so like I said, supported by the ATO, so as a general rule. So that's one option that an NDIS operator could use. But the other option is to do a controlled exit, to look at shutting down the business and going home. Now that might be via a sale. So we might go, right, the owner's had enough. So we go, right, can we sell the business? Who can we sell it to? And we've worked a number of NDIS operators through that process in getting that sale in place. Then when the sale's completed, the money comes into the company, and then we can go, right, how does that money need to be distributed out, and how does that work the best way for the business owner? Because sometimes, like I said, if they've acted early, there mightn't be any personal liability on some of the debts. So we need to be strategic as to how that money flows through, and then potentially either there's enough money to pay all the creditors, or if there's not, then we can look at a formal insolvency strategy once the business is sold and the money has moved through the business. I hope that answers that.
Yeah. Look, you mentioned before, obviously, about your story of how you got to this point, and the financial pressure can feel very personal. You've obviously lived it yourself. Just really quickly, how do you separate this sort of thing from self-worth, really, in this sort of a space? It can be a very powerful tool.
Correct. I think for me, going through that financial difficulty, I think the hardest thing was I had a 14-year-old son at the time, and he had a motorbike, and of course, any time in the past when that motorbike had to be repaired, it was never a problem, and it would just happen. And I remember just at that time the motorbike had broken, and my son was asking for that to be repaired, and I just didn't have the money to do it. And I found that probably more heart-wrenching than a lot of it, because you do feel like a failure. And you feel like a failure at home. So I think that part of it is really, really important. I think what's important for business operators to understand is that they're not Robinson Crusoe. There's lots and lots of business operators that are in financial strife. I think it's 1/3 of Australian businesses at the moment have got overdue tax debt to the Australian Taxation Office. That's 1/3. That is a massive number. I think I think the strength needs to come in going, right, I've got a problem, I'm going to get advice. Let's get advice. Let's work out the best way out of Dodge. Because things like these small business restructures and so on have been designed specifically to help business owners get through that. So I think it's just realising they're not alone. Okay, and that there are lots of people in the same position, and I think the biggest relief that we see from meeting with a client the first time in the boardroom, they're scared, they're upset, the wife's worried about potentially losing the house and so on. At the end of that meeting, you can see there's an enormous weight lifted off the shoulder, because options are understood. And I think when it's unknown, it's really, really scary. But when we've got a path or a plan, then that eases off a lot, because you can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was really enlightening. If there are providers listening to us today who think they might want to reach out and have a chat to you about how you might be able to help them if they're feeling some of this financial stress, what's the best way for them to get in contact?
Well, Tania, it's easy. I guess Jonge Read, our email details, have we going to share? You can probably share them out through you guys, but it's simply a matter of giving us a call. If an operator gives us a call, it's cost no charge to have a discussion, to have a meeting, to have a look at the different options. It's all free. Okay. What we do at the end of that discussion is we provide a written advice. Okay, and again, all totally free. The client, with that written advice, gets a full plan on what we're recommending, and we quote a fixed fee for the implementation of that advice. So the client's got everything to gain and nothing to lose by having a chat to us. And like I said, that best way to reach out to us is via our website, which is www.djra.com.au, or just simply search Jonge Read. We'd love to have a chat to any operators who have got any type of fear whatsoever.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's awesome. I believe you're also sponsoring our International Women's Day events coming up. So we're really looking forward to having you at those events, and people can connect with you there as well. And they'll be kicking off in the first week of March.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tania, Paul, for having me on along today.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. See you later.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
See you later.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Profitable NDIS Provider podcast with Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. We hope you found today's episode informative and valuable. If you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating, and share it with others who could benefit from our insights. Until next time, keep thriving.